What's up, my know-it-alls? Well, that's right. It's time for another Star Trek Strange New Worlds. So, wait a minute, but where am I? Okay, so I'm actually on location at a video production shoot. So, those of you who've been following the channel for a little bit, I got a job, and so I'm working on. I'm a video production guy. I oversee different projects and whatnot. Like I've told you in the past, I worked on 3 TV pilots. I've written scripts and whatnot, and I also produce commercial videos. So, yeah, it's pretty exciting being working again. But I was not gonna miss this review. So, stick around. Give me a like and a subscribe. It helps grow the channel. But now we're gonna hear to talk about Strange New Worlds, Episode 5, Charades. Man, I tell you what, so there are people who talk about things like, there are people who got screeners of this season and have been already casting aspersions toward this episode. And I like to take these things as they come. I don't sit here and judge. I know one of my friends, he watches and reviews things based on every episode of Strange New Worlds, or Star Trek rather, that has ever come out. He compares everything to anything other thing called Star Trek. I take each episode as its own thing. I try my best, especially with this kind of TV, that's episodic. I try not to judge or try to make things fit within, oh, well, this whole season is blah, 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 if it's just this episode. So I take each episode as they come. This is a very interesting episode. It does put canon a little bit on its head, but so here's the thing about canon real quick. Most people see canon as a steel bar, and anything that goes against it is chipping away at the integrity of that bar, or rust, or whatever else, and eventually could make it brittle and break. I don't see it that way. I see canon as a very thick rope, and I feel like it's flexible. And as you add things, you write in between the lines and you weave things together, and pretty soon you twist the thing, and what you get is a very strong yet still malleable connective tissue. Hopefully that makes some sense about where I'm coming from for this episode. So, the episode's pretty straightforward. It starts with, specifically, Chapel and Spock are on very different paths. And Chapel's feeling the way she's feeling. She's feeling somewhat like neglected, or like he's purposely avoiding her. And meanwhile, Spock is hyper-focused on work and other things because he's got a thing coming up. So, last episode, or 2 episodes ago, Chapel talked about the fact that she may be looking to leave Enterprise, even briefly, for a Vulcan fellowship. Now, this fellowship would allow her to kind of get some space to, work some things out. And it's a very rigorous process. But the only person she's not practicing with for a Vulcan fellowship, or archaeological fellowship, is Spock. And so you later find out Spock himself is going through some stuff, and that he has found out that his soon-to-be mother-in-law, T'Pril, is insisting that they have the vashar, which is their engagement dinner, in the Vulcan engagement dinner. And come to find out, when it comes to the relationship between T'Pril and T'Pring and Spock and whatnot, her mother is the person who's the most against the relationship. Her father has experience with Sarek and is a former colleague of Sarek's, and because of their connection, that's why he agreed to the bonding and to the pairing. And so it's one of those things where it's this family dynamic, and they've got to do something in terms of being able to bring those two entities together. So what happens? Well, the first thing is Spock has to go on another mission where they're investigating the Kirkovian species that apparently up and disappeared. You later find out they didn't disappear. They ascended to become extra-dimensional beings. It's so funny, though, because the way they're portrayed is they're extra-dimensional beings who, very similar to normal dimensional beings, have, phone numbers and protocols and things, and anyway, you'll see. So what happens is, they're on their way to Vulcan, and Spock is going to fly this scanning science mission, and Chapel is going to be a passenger on the shuttle, and as they're going to do their follow through, what happens is they find a gravitational anomaly in space. It's Star Trek. Why wouldn't you find a gravitational anomaly in space? Am I right? And so what ends up happening is they end up, he calls it turning into the skids, trying to help their situation, and ultimately they careen into the thing, and there seemingly is some sort of an accident. When we wake up after the intro, or actually right before the intro, it's exactly the scene you saw they put out earlier last week, or at the end of last week. where they wake up in sickbay. Spock wakes up in sickbay. Everyone's looking down at him, and he's fully human. It's crazy. And as a fully human, he begins to experience genuinely human-esque emotions. And it's funny because they do this really interesting comparison where they explain that human emotions and Vulcan emotions are very different. It's one of the most interesting looks at Vulcan human culture, I think probably since Enterprise. And this is a guy speaking I wasn't a big fan of the Enterprise series, but I remember very clearly some things. They also do a callback to the fact that humans smell and Vulcans can smell them. And apparently they use, Spock uses nasal suppressants because of it. So now that he's fully human, Uhura is working on the whole thing, and she finds, after she's kind of figuring out some stuff, reading the different the readings from the shuttle, she finds the equivalent of a phone number, and they call it, and it's the creature is who identifies themselves as Krakovian, looks like an energy ball, and describes themselves as yellow, and so yellow is one of those characters where they're very much like remediation has been made. There were, according to our guidelines, you were injured, this and that, I fixed you. And then you find out the truth of what happened. There were two beings on the shuttle, Chapel and Spock. The one being had instructions, the other one had mixed instructions. And so they resolved to make them match. Because there was enough of his human side to show, oh, you're a match to that, there's something wrong, I'll fix you this way. Whatever the anomaly is must have just been goofy. Must have been something that was screwed up that made him half Vulcan. So now and the thing is, he's going through the equivalent of adolescence, trying to explore all these emotions. So Chapel's over here trying to find a cure, working night and day, and then you get a call, because Pike had to bring in them something, and he said, hey, you guys, he's been injured. And so they've postponed the dinner. That's when Spock's mom shows up. Oh my goodness, it's so good seeing her again. She's such a great actress, and so he shows up in the transporter room in this very juvenile. It's so funny because other people who criticize it are saying, "Why are they making Spock such a juvenile?" Blah blah blah. This and that. I don't think they are. I think what they're doing is we're reading between the lines of smiley, happy Spock we saw in The Cage. Or the Menagerie, if you prefer. And what we're seeing is a look into who he was prior. Now, he hasn't gone through all the stuff to purge his emotions yet, so at the end of the day, he's still dealing with... Well, and now, to say nothing of the fact that now he's fully human. So, in this context. So, her mother, Amanda, shows up and says, yeah, we're... she's coming tomorrow night. The Vashar's happening here tomorrow night. They're coming. They're willing to be understanding of your illness or your injuries. And then she finds out the extent of it, which is that he's human. And so she's immediately, I'm sure she's captivated and utterly enamored by the idea. But the truth is, it's a very scary situation to be in, especially if he could risk losing his entire engagement. Because T'Pring will not hold back if something's wrong. So, what does Amanda do? She teaches him to lie. Yep, because that's all you're going to do in this scenario is lie. Why? When has that ever worked? 80s sitcoms have already taught us that this will never work. That's okay, because the show is totally based on a 60s show. Anyway, so then they go through and you find out, this is a wonderful, if adjacent look into Spock's mother. In that, come to find out, so one of the parts of the ceremony is you have to serve tea a certain way. To Vulcans, the really hot teapot would be just a really hot teapot. To humans, it burns. He's human now. So he's starting to realize more and more everything his mother's gone through all her life. I tell you what, I really enjoyed seeing this insight into them, into the human relationship of Spock's mother, and clearly what she went through. And this through line kind of goes through the whole thing in terms of this back and forth. There's an analogy at work here, and it's not just between Spock and his mother. So meanwhile, Chapel's working very hard to find things, and she comes to the conclusion that if she doesn't find a fix for him now, his cells are going to permanently stay this way, and he'll never be able to be brought back to normal. She's the most logical person, no pun intended, to work on this, because if you remember back in season 1, one of her hobbies is alien genetics, and playing a little bit with that. And so what ends up happening is they realize they have to try to contact these aliens again, but the aliens already cut them off. Literally, they were like, remediation's been made, no further contact is necessary. Because they realized that as a far more advanced species, there's no value to be had in trying to interact. They fixed the problem that they thought was broken, and that was it. So they come to the idea, if they can get close to the anomaly again, then maybe Uhura can make a connection. So Ortegas, Uhura, and Chapel all get in the shuttle and they head back to the place where they were studying. Sure enough, there's the tunnel, and the conclusion they come to is, if they go in, it might be like water in a storm. Underneath the water, suddenly it's clear and much more calm. Ortegas is like, it never works that way, but don't worry, trust her, because Ortegas flies the ship. And so they go in. Meanwhile, Spock and them are begin this ceremony. They show up. They're faking it. He's got fake ears. He's got to try to play it off. And one of the very first things they do is this, like, I'm going to tell you about yourself ceremony. And so, literally, and Amanda, she's so kind. She's trying to be, she's like, you should come visit more. Your family misses you, blah, 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 and this and that. And they're like, you're being kind. Stop doing that. The exercise is supposed to help us all strengthen and encourage one another and be better because of it. Then it's Spock's turn. And T'Pring starts out with, you are a disappointment to your species. You're like, oh my God. And yeah, she just jumps right in. And even Pike, who's hosting the thing, is like, right, really? Tough crowd. And so sure enough, yeah, so she's reeling into him, and at the very end of that thing, he's like, I have to go to the bathroom, and he goes, and that's, you saw the thing in the clips from the season where he's like, it's because he's so angry, so he grabs a towel, puts it over his face, he's like, he's so mad, and I felt him hardcore on that. So then, they Chapel and them make contact. They make contact with an alien named Blue, and you find out that Blue gets a hold of Yellow, and they start talking. And Yellow finds out that they're friends, and Chapel's like, yeah, he's my friend. And she's like, oh, well, you have no rights to a complaint. It's outside, and complaining outside of the complaint period is highly irregular, because they have all kinds of rules we don't know about. Extra-dimensional beings, they got their own rules. Starfleet does too, so, hey, whatever. But at the end of the day, when as they're sitting here trying to solve this problem, the alien's like, oh, well, hang on. So is that why the other creature tried to protect you? And she's like, wait, what? Come to find out, when this whole thing was going down, Spock diverted the shields to protect her. And she's like, oh, I can't believe it. And so the alien's like, I'm going to help you, but explain this to me. What is your connection to him? She's like, oh, it's complicated. And this is when Uhura and Ortega are literally like the girlfriends on the side who are like, girl, you better make it simple. If you want your man to be back to normal, you better hurry up and tell these people something. And so Chapel has to come clean. She's like, I wish he was this, I wish he was that. You guys made him better to communicate. Now he understands me, but he's not my Spock. And so then they're about to do the mind meld. Part of the ceremony for the Vashar is this mind meld with his mother, so it's a shared memory. And when they tried to fake it in the lessons about how to lie, both Una and Pike could tell that Spock was trying to fake. It wasn't going well. So they know this is the moment that they'll screw up if there's going to be a screw up. So Amanda and Pike are like, oh well, there's human custom that we have to abide by because hey, it's a combination of cultures, And the situation is, Pike goes, charades. You got to play charades. Look, guys. I love the fact that you gave it a clever name for this episode, but when on the backs of, Among the Lotus Eaters, the name of last week's episode, calling the episode Charades because of one comment and one sentence that's offshoot, it's lazy writing. Tighten up. And so what happens is, that's when Chapel shows up at the door. She's like, I got for your injuries, I have your supplement. And so they go to the side, and he's trying to tell her what he's been feeling, and she immediately injects him. And he will almost instantly go back to being internally very, very much a Vulcan. He'll be back to his normal self. The physical stuff will show up in a couple hours afterwards. And they finish the whole thing. He does the mind meld, and the mind meld is apparently a really wonderful moment. His mother shares. What she shares is the first time. Well, you find out she shared the first time he was invited to play with other Vulcans. and for her, and you really get to see how much she's gone through. And as they're going through it all, the whole thing ends, and Spock is very much, he's talking to them, and then the mother, T'Pring, has to admit that everything has been done and all the agreements were acknowledged and everything's the way it is. And that's when Spock's like, because a human could never do this, and he pulls off the fake ears. And they obviously learn everything going on, and he's like, it's not fair. I understand what my mother's gone through. It's a very heartwarming moment. T'Pring afterwards she's upset, and she says, we need to spend some time apart. And I believe this is what they've been talking about. If you remember the last time we saw her in TOS, it was a mock time, and they had been apart for a while. I firmly believe this is when that happened. So this is them being apart. It leads to this goodbye moment where Spock's talking to his mother, and he basically comes out and she says the line, it's very difficult being a human loving a Vulcan, but it's worth it, blah, 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 blah. The parallel is Chapel. So Spock is sitting in his room, and he's ruminating, and he realizes he wants to do something. He opens the door, and she's outside the door. He was going to see her, she's coming to see him, and he's like, I don't want to fight these emotions anymore. And this is the part people have a lot of trouble with. Oh, it breaks canon, it's this and that. We don't know. This is the rope tied around the holes of canon. We have no clue what their relationship is like later. Okay, we have or earlier. And I firmly believe there's nothing wrong with this, but all I know is in that moment so Spock and Chapel kiss finally. It's very satisfying. I don't know why, but it is. So yeah, there you go. Now you know. And if knowing's half the battle, you're halfway to being a know-it-all yourself. What's the know-it-all index for this episode this week? I'm going to go, it's not a great episode. Like, it's not like shooting for the stars, but it is a very sound and it's an episode of quality, and I'm okay with that. Is it the greatest episode of Strange New Worlds? No, of course not. For my money, truthfully, Quality of Mercy was still really, really high up there. I firmly believe it's a very Star Trek episode. I'm going to go with a 7. I'm going to go solid 7, and it's a respectable 7. I'm not beating up the show. I loved everything that this episode was doing. I love the insights. I'm not a canon freak, so to me it's okay. And again, I feel like canon's very malleable, and I don't see there's not a lot of leaps that I got to take to follow this story. So comment below, let me know your thoughts on the episode. I can't wait to see you guys next week. Thank you again for all the support. Working again, getting on this thing. I'm feeling really good. Plus, I felt like this was the most Strange New Worlds looking background because the hotel I'm in has this arch thing, like with this cat. Yeah. And so I was like, maybe it's my crew quarters aboard the USS Know-It-All. All right, guys. I'll talk to you next week. Never forget, everyone loves a know-it-all.